Well, it's Pentecost Sunday, and I want to thank Darrell for that wonderful godly play story that shows so clearly the spread of the light throughout the whole world. So Pentecost, just for a little Sunday school lesson, the word means 50th day or 50 day, and the Pentecost was actually one of the harvest festivals or seasonal festivals that occurred during that time. So Pentecost had a long history, long before this Pentecost story that we have today. It was said to be a Jewish pilgrimage festival, one of three pilgrimage festivals, Shavuot, in which the people came from far and wide to the temple, to Jerusalem, for that festival. And so that kind of explains the story a little bit when we find all of those people coming from all of those places, which Tim did an incredible job of pronouncing the names of. Very good, Tim, thank you so much, beautifully read. And so they came from far and wide for that festival. It's also sometimes known as Whit Sunday or White Sunday. There's a lot of stories around why that was so. The one that applies maybe to us as Christians, it's called White Sunday because it's a time, it's a Sunday for baptisms, and it's a time when those who were to be baptized were wearing white. But there's also a tradition of white Sunday dresses. In fact, I just Googled that White Sunday, and it came up on Google with all kinds of places where women could buy a white Sunday dress. So did you buy a white Sunday dress? Yes, okay. So there you go. But we read in Acts, in that wonderful story in Acts, where there were around 3,000 people baptized, it said, that Pentecost day. And also it was clear that they were sober. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, just to be clear about how that went down, everybody was sober and a sound mind. And it's also often referred to as the birthday of the church. There's some issues around that for me, but maybe I'll talk about that in just a minute. Oftentimes during Pentecost, sometimes in services before Pentecost Sunday, the Tower of Babel story is read. And what a paradoxical story that is, the Tower of Babel. You know what the story is? The people the people of God, I guess, or the people of gods, because, well, I'll come back to that. But anyway, the people were all gathered together and they were building this tower to heaven. And they all spoke the same language and they all worked really, really well together, and they were just building away on this tower. And God, or the gods, said it would seem that they felt threatened. And so they said, look, there are one people, and they have all the same language. I'm reading from that story. They all have the same language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech. What a plan. What does God have in mind? And you notice that they said, they used the pronoun we when they referred to themselves, these gods. So it's an old story, perhaps before the idea of monotheism became the plan. A strange story, part of the creation story, part of the story about who and why we are. Maybe it was putting human beings on the path to become more human. dispersed throughout the whole earth with different languages, different understandings, different traditions. All of that resulted. There's a line in the Quran, if I may speak of that in this day and age. But God said, I made you different so that you would know one another. I made you different so you could know one another. And so in our culture today, it really needs to be that way. We need to be able to talk to each other and listen to each other a little better anyway. And so it's our egos that have arisen, really, that keep us separate. We see that. Having trouble getting my little thing to work here. There you go. So the gospel story that I read is the story of the promise of the Holy Spirit, the promise being fulfilled, really. So before he went to his death, he talked to the disciples. We talked about that last week, I think. And he said, do not be afraid. The Holy Spirit will come to you, and will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. And he says, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This advocate will be with you forever. So we have the Pentecost story then, and the Holy Spirit makes an appearance as promised. And the disciples began to speak the language of all who were gathered there. And those who were gathered began to understand. They understand one another. They understand the story of the resurrection. Peter began to teach them, and all understood. And as I said, that day about 3,000 people were baptized and received the Holy Spirit. People of perhaps disparate traditions and nationality and ethnicity were brought together in a new community of understanding. The spirit of truth and compassion and love and unity was understood. So in a way, it was indeed the birthday of the church. But not the Episcopal Church. I got born a long time later. Or any other church as we know church. What happened that day was the universal community of man that Jesus so passionately died for. Community, ecclesia. Oftentimes I remind us that that word church that we read in our scriptures comes from the Greek word ecclesia, which simply means community. So today our culture has been divided, our culture here, into camps of ideology that have lost their ability really to talk to one another. You know what it is. It's politics, religion, nationalism, ethnicity. I can't say that word. All of that, issues over those things, have made us impossible for us to even talk to each other sometimes. Our world, our community, even our communities desperately find a way to find access to this birthright of the Holy Spirit. How much we need that. The command to love one another. We read it in the gospel. Love one another as I have loved you. We seek that peace. I think we seek that peace which the Lord left for us We seek that advocate. Could we just stop and listen to one another? There's a saying that says, you can't argue with me until you understand me. And it said that to truly listen, one must be willing to be changed. Not agree to change, just willing to be changed by what one hears. So here's a little poem from the 13th century Sufi mystic Rumi. Beyond our ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense anymore. The peace we seek seems to defy all understanding. Our attempts to understand one another with our heads, with our intellect in our heads rather than our hearts, it gets in the way of any possible answer to the peace which is hardly understood. And things are more than just a little bit challenging right now. I'm sure nobody is missing that point. Nobody in the whole world is missing that point. Things are more than challenging right now. We seem to have no control over a deadly threat that has been visited upon us. Life has changed. And we want things to be back the way they were. We've been asked or even required to take rather extreme measures to separate ourselves for our own protection, for our own safety. But many are angry and frustrated. People seem willing to accept rather ominous risk to themselves and to others to have things back the way they are, the way they were. We're angry and we don't know who to blame. So we blame those who try to tell us the truth. We can always blame God. God's shoulders are plenty broad enough to withstand our blame. You know, actually God created all of this, didn't God? Mostly I think we're all grieving a big loss, a huge loss, the loss of our way of living. And it may not be such a temporary loss. We just don't know. We shall see what a new normal might look like. For you and me, we long to be back in these pews. It would be helpful if we could know when that will be. I think everyone wants to know when will that be. It would be so easy to just imagine a date of when we can come back to church and put it in our calendar only to have it pass in disappointment. So instead, if you will, I offer a little bit of wisdom from Plato. He lived a long time ago. And actually this line comes from Socrates, but it comes from Plato's apology of Socrates. I neither know nor think that I know. I neither know nor think that I know. So often we don't know, but we think we know. A very wise thing. So here's another little bit of a poem from the poet Maria Rainer Rilke. He offers us this. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Do not seek the answers that cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer.